Hi everyone, I took a couple of weeks off there just to get a little break from making videos, and now I'm back, and I thought what better time than to tell a little story about something that actually happened to me. About 20 years ago I worked in a nightclub. It was actually the third nightclub that I had worked in, and when I worked in the nightclubs, a lot of people don't realise that when you do that sort of job, especially once you start getting involved in sort of being a supervisor and all that sort of stuff, you end up working day shifts, deliveries, making sure things are fixed in the club during the day. You end up working through the day as well as at night. And when you're in a place like a nightclub that is usually packed with people dancing and singing and enjoying themselves, it's an unnerving experience to be there when there's no one else. There's something about that. I think that's why some of the abandoned places that we find frightening, like for example like an abandoned fairground or an abandoned hospital, that these places that normally have a lot of people in them are much more frightening in some ways when suddenly those people are gone. It goes against our expectations, and that's what it's like walking around a nightclub when there's no one else there. It's the emptiness of it. The third nightclub that I worked in was a nightclub called The Shed. It's on the south side of Glasgow in a place called Shawland. It's in a residential area. And when I had started working there, it had just been closed for 2 years. And the reason it had been closed is there had been this legal battle between the owners of the nightclub and the people who lived in the street next to the nightclub. Now I can understand why this happened. It must have been really difficult for people coming out. You know, you live there, you have your house, you have your garden, and then people are pouring out of a nightclub at 2 or 3 in the morning. And I'm sure some of them were probably peeing in the gardens and doing all sorts of things. And so petitions were put in place with the local council, and the nightclub was shut. So this legal battle went on for 2 years. That was when I got the job at the nightclub. I'd been out of work for 3 months. I'd left the previous nightclub that I worked in, and my money ran out. So I phoned one of my friends who I knew was still working in the nightclub. He actually instantly was like, "We're reopening the Shed. We need some charge hands," which are people who run the bars. And he said, "Come and get a job." So I went down. And the Shed was a really interesting building. It had this, it's made of sandstone. It's 100 years old. And it had this garden, wildlife, wilderness kind of theme to it. If you walked into the nightclub, the main staircase had panels of grass that went up the walls that we had to hang up on huge boards every month and take the grass down and change it, water it, bring out lights when people weren't there so that it was getting water. And one customer even complained because she got a fright because she was walking by one of them and a worm came out and wriggled at her face. So she wasn't too happy about that. While we were getting the nightclub ready for its grand reopening, just stocking all the bars, making sure everything was working correctly in the building, there started to be rumours about something strange going on there. Now there were 4 bars inside the entire building, and the one at the sort of top of the building, the top level, was called the Loft. It was quite a big bar. It had quite a big dance area, but it wasn't always open. It would only open on our busiest nights. We'd normally keep it closed on quieter nights. So in the run up to the grand reopening of the nightclub, there were a handful of us that were asked to get everything ready in the club for that night. And that was the first time that, one, I felt the eeriness of the place. It was a strange, it's such a big building. There was 4 bars, and each bar had its own area. Some of them, it was like a full section of the building with a dance floor, and your footsteps echoed out throughout the building whenever you walked around. And it was at that time that I was first told the stories by one of the managers there. He had been there for like a month or two before I started, getting everything ready and prepped. And he'd had an altercation with the caretaker, whose job it had been for the 2 years that the nightclub had been shut, to keep the building running, run the heating every now and then, make sure all the electrics are working, make sure there are no maintenance issues that need to be taken care of, so that if the call did come down, the club was going to open. It wouldn't take too long to get the place back on its feet. Now, one of the things that happened was that early on, the people who were running the company that owned the nightclub, and they owned many nightclubs throughout Glasgow, started realising that the electricity bill for the Shed nightclub was ridiculous. I mean, this was a place that wasn't open, so the an electricity bill should have been minimal. And so that was a little bit of a puzzle. And then people started realising that when they were coming in and opening the nightclub, that all the lights were on throughout the building. And so the poor caretaker got blamed for this. The owners of the nightclub said to the managers, make sure he's switching everything off because it's costing us money. And so one of the times one of the managers came in and all the lights were on in the building. And so he actually had to take the caretaker into his office and say, look, you need to stop doing this, and give him a little bit of a dressing down. And the caretaker wasn't taking any of that nonsense. He was like, look, I switch off every light in this building every time I leave. Someone else with another set of keys is coming into the building and they're turning on all the fuses. Now, as it turns out, there was a fuse box. It was in an electrical cupboard in one of the stairwells. I ended up being in that electrical cupboard a number of times, and in order to switch on all the fuses and for all the lights, there were these levers basically that you had to flip. And they weren't just like the little ones you get in your consumer unit in your house. They were like proper large fuses, but you had to really give them a good push to get them to turn on. The caretaker was adamant. He said, look, they're all switched off when I leave. And eventually the argument got to the point where the manager wanted to prove that he was right, so he looked at the video footage. So they put the video footage on from the security cameras that were all around inside the club, and there was one outside as well. And the video footage showed the caretaker doing his rounds, going throughout the club, looking at every room, and then you could see him disappear into the electrical cupboard. Every light in the building just started going off until the building only had its emergency lighting on, which was this kind of green luminous lighting that would be above all the fire exits. And so he then leaves the electrical cupboard, goes down the stairs, goes out the front door, locks up, and the security camera outside shows him walk away from the club. They fast forward the tape. 8 minutes later, every single light in the building comes on. Every single light. And so this is a bit of a mystery. No one else is in the building. The security cameras don't show anybody going into the electrical cupboard. And we all know that the switches require a physical presence to actually switch them on and off. That was the sort of first really strange thing that I get told about. And then after that, there started to be rumours about footsteps and things like that. And I did hear footsteps that I couldn't say where they came from, but the building's so large, and as I said, the footsteps from people echo throughout, that even if I had been in the building just with one other person, I might have been able to hear their footsteps, from a completely different level on the building. I don't really know, but there were times where I heard footsteps and it was unnerving, and it was especially unnerving if it came from the top bar, which was called the Loft. And that bar had a dance floor, and that seemed to be the place where people were most freaked out inside the nightclub when it was closed. The staff didn't like going in there. The managers didn't like going in there. These strange things continued on once the nightclub was actually opened. And so on a Sunday night, which was our quietest night of the week, we wouldn't open the top bar. We wouldn't open that. We'd only open the main bar downstairs. But what quite often happened is that we would rotor on a lot of staff too many probably, so everyone's just kind of standing about, not really doing much. And I don't really believe in having to keep staff busy, but I was a supervisor, I was a charge hand on that bar, and I was told by people above me, and they were told by people above them, that they didn't want to see people just sort of standing about, so you had to keep them busy. So we would find different jobs around the club, and sometimes that would be something upstairs in the loft bar while it was shut. And so for the first little while, if it was a Sunday night and I had to find things for people to do, I would send someone up into the loft bar to clean the bar. What often happened was that on a Saturday night, that was the bar that all of the staff that worked in the club, the bouncers, the glass collectors, toilet attendants, the bar staff, the managers, the charge hands, like everybody that worked in the club would go up to the loft bar on a Saturday night after it had closed, and everyone would get a free drink, and then they could buy drinks after that if they wanted to. What would quite often happen in the loft bar is we would leave all our drinks, all the empty glasses and bottles, and they would just get cleaned away either the next day or maybe even a day or two later, because the loft bar wouldn't open up again until towards the end of the week, or until the weekend. And so that stuff would just get left there. So sometimes on a Sunday night I would send someone up, like, well, you might as well just start cleaning those glasses and putting things away up there. So that was okay for the first little while, but eventually when I was asking people to go up there, they started to feel frightened. They started to feel scared, apprehensive. Nothing particularly had happened by that point to the staff, but there were like rumours that people were going up there and they felt like they were being watched by someone. And when you were behind that bar, when it was closed, it was very dim outside of the bar on the dance floor and beyond. There was little areas for seating and stuff like that, and it was quite a shadowy place, so that added to the fact that you couldn't see who was there, and so people were behind the bar, especially if they were on their own. They didn't like it. There was something about the atmosphere of that place. Eventually staff actually started to refuse to go up there, and I remember one guy in particular was like, and he was a big lad, he was a big guy, wasn't afraid of anything, but he was like, I'm not going up there on my own. And so I had to end up always finding someone else to go up there with that person. So like I would send 2 or 3 people up at a time, and then they would go up, but not on their own. Put it down to superstition, but I realised at the time that the place was quite eerie and unnerving. Now a little later on, there were people who claimed that they had felt actual physical touch from someone while they were walking around up there in that bar. Someone brushing past them or someone touching them on the shoulder. And this was added to, again, people saying that they were hearing footsteps and doors closing where there was no one there and all that sort of stuff. Classic kind of haunting activity. So things escalated until the most dramatic thing happened in my time at the club. And that was that I came in one day for a day shift. I think it was a Wednesday, around about lunchtime. When I came into the stockroom area, which was at the rear of the loft bar, and there was another staircase up to it, so you didn't need to go into the loft bar if you didn't want to. I found one of the staff sitting on some cases of beer with his head in his hands, really shaking, like really shaken by something, sheet white. And this was a guy who was actually had a very sort of wry sense of humour. He was very straight down the line. Really nice person, but very assured, and didn't believe in any of the stuff that people had been talking about up at the loft bar up until this point. Now he was surrounded by 2 or 3 other staff members who were like consoling him, and so I was like, well, what happened? And he just said, look in the loft bar, look in the loft bar. So I went into the loft bar, and all of the staff drinks that had been put on top of the loft bar, glass bottles as well, they were all smashed to pieces and lying everywhere, scattered everywhere, all over the dance floor, all over the top of the bar, and round the back of the bar, into the coolers that we have there, and all. It was a real mess. And in front of the bar was a cage. Now these cages had wheels on them, and if the lift worked, half the time it didn't, but if the lift worked, you could actually take up 20 or 30 cases of beer in one go and then come out the lift, but you had to cut through the loft bar if you did that. So this cage had wheels on it, It was sitting in front of the loft bar, and it was filled with cases of beer. So that's what I found. So I went back outside of the bar, back into the stock area to speak to the guy that this had happened to. I was like, what happened? And he said, look, I took that cage of beer up the lift, came out into the loft bar. I was walking across the loft bar towards it, pushing this cage, and suddenly something hit me from the side, knocked me away from the cage. Then the cage accelerated as if something was pushing it. It smashed off the front of the bar, and then all the glasses and bottles that were lined up on top of the bar, it was as if someone had taken their hand and just put it through the glass and the bottles really quickly and violently, smashing everything. He was terrified. He ran out of there into the stockroom, and that's where he was found by other members of staff. Normally you'd think, well, maybe there's been an accident, maybe this guy's lost his mind temporarily and done something really stupid and he's blaming it on a ghost. But the thing was, he kept saying to me, look at the security footage, look at the security footage. Now he knew as well as I did that there was a camera above the bar that took in the whole area. So whatever had happened in there, it would have recorded it. So as it happens, one of the managers was in that day. And so I went to the office and I found the manager there. And I said to her, I was all excited because I was like, you know, this is my wheelhouse. Like, I love this stuff, you know. And I said to her, look, this is what one of your staff is saying happened. The place is in disarray downstairs. He's volunteering, saying, look at the security camera. It's not like I've said, well, we'll look at the security footage and we'll find out if you're telling nonsense or not. He was saying, go and look at it, go and look at it. He did that before I mentioned it. And so I said to the manager, I said, we've got to look at this footage, you know. If he's telling the truth, we've captured something really remarkable on video. And frustratingly, that manager refused to look at the video footage. No matter what I said to her, she said nope, and she actually taped over the footage. And the reason she gave was, she said, Michael, I am in this building a lot of the time on my own, up on this level just above and just next to the loft bar. I don't believe in ghosts, but I want to keep it that way. And then she kind of, with a little push, admitted that she was pretty freaked out by that part of the building. But she just was adamant that she didn't want to see, she didn't want to know. She'd rather it just be left. And so that's what happened. I not that long after then, maybe within a couple of months, I left the nightclub to go and become a guitar tutor. That was my job for a while after that. It's still to this day been one of the more interesting things in terms of potentially paranormal activity. Now, you know me, I'm agnostic about it. I'm open-minded but critical. I don't necessarily think these things are real. I don't know if they're real or not. Now, something interesting happened that took me back to my childhood, and it connected to what was happening in the shed. So when I was a kid, I collected ghost stories, fictional and allegedly true. This was stuff that I just read about voraciously, and I immersed myself in it. And I remember reading a story about a allegedly true ghost, real ghost, that haunted a place in Glasgow, and it was called the Malborough ghost. And all I remembered about it is that it was a woman, couldn't remember much more other than that, and that she had thrown herself out of a window and committed suicide. What's interesting is that not long before I left the nightclub, a couple of people who were more invested in that area and knew a little bit about it told me, yeah, this is the Malborough ghost. This used to be the Malborough dance hall. Decades previous, that's what the Shed nightclub was. So apparently, so the story goes, there was a woman that worked at the Malborough. She fell pregnant because of a man that she worked with who was one of the managers there. And this was deeply frowned upon. This was like in the early 20th century, so there was a great stigma against that sort of thing. and the manager didn't want anything to do with her or the baby, and tragically, so the story goes, she threw herself out of the window at the top of the building. Now, where I get told she did it was just at the Loft Bar, and the windows in the Shed nightclub were all boarded over, but there were boards that could be unlocked and opened so that you could get to the windows, but normally they were closed over, so there was no external light coming in to the building. There was a window right where a lot of the stuff had occurred on that spot, or just next to it, and there was a window there, and this is supposedly that's where it came from. And I knew part of the story because I'd read about it as a kid. I would love to find that book. I don't know what book it appeared in. It was probably a book of local ghost stories that my dad had picked up at some point because he was always sharing them with me. So who knows, did we hear and experience the ghost of that woman? I don't know. The skeptic in me would say no, it was all speculation and superstition and dark shadows. People get scared in situations like that. But as with all these things, I always leave the door open. And the actual experience of these things was pretty eerie. And that building in particular is still, that part of the building still remains one of the scarier places that I've been in my life. And I can't quite explain why. So I hope you enjoyed this little story. I might do some more of these at some point. If you haven't, please subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell, and let me know in the comments, do you have any personal ghost stories yourself? I might do a viewer ghost story video at some point, so if there's any stories that you have, please do leave them below and I might include them. Thanks very much to everybody who's watched, and I'll be back again soon with another spooky video.